Hello everybody. I am Artis Pabriks. I am Director of Northern Europe Policy Center here in Riga in Latvia. And today we are having an online discussion with two very prominent experts about Vilnius NATO summit, which just was concluded in our neighboring country Lithuania. And we would like to discuss a number of issues what we think were important within let's say, the premises of this event in Vilnius. Today, together with me, I have my old friend and colleague from Canada, Dr. Balkan Devlen, who is, I will just read precisely, the director of Transatlantic program of Macdonald-Laurier Institute, old partner of Latvia and friend of Latvia, who just returned from Vilnius, so with fresh experiences from the sidelines of NATO summit. And another expert today who is ready to share his views about outcomes of this summit is Sandis Šrāders, who is, on the one hand, expert in our North European Policy Center, but he is also an expert and researcher in Center for Security and Strategic Studies within Latvian National Defense Academy. So welcome Balkan, welcome Sandis, and I will start probably with the first issue and the first question, and it will be kind of self-centered. It will be the question about what this summit was bringing to Latvia, what was giving to Latvian security, Baltic security, and Baltic Sea area security, because in my view, and I wrote it also yesterday in a small article in the Latvian language, I see the Vilnius summit as a continuation summit of Madrid, because the most of those issues which were discussed and agreed upon in Vilnius, they were actually based on those agreements and positions discussed already last year in summer in Madrid, when heads of NATO, ministers of defense, foreign ministers met in Madrid just a few months after the Russian invasion in Ukraine. So, but first question about Latvia, Baltics, and our great cooperation between Latvia and Canada. And I think, Balkan, I will give you first floor on this issue, and I probably would have my own comments also, since Prime Minister Trudeau were just a few days ago also here in Riga announcing how and what Canada might do to bolster the defense of NATO eastern borders here in Latvia.
No, thank you very much, and thank you very much for your kind introduction. It's always a pleasure to be able to talk with you. And I will be very much looking forward to your own assessment of how the promises and the announcements that Canada made when it comes to our mission here in Latvia and what it means from the region. And of course, you played a very sort of major role in getting these commitments down and locked in when you were defense minister. So
you mean the written declaration?
Yes, exactly. The words are there, the signatures are there. I think that matters a lot rather than some promises, right? So I think that's very important. I'd like to see get your reaction about how they're going to be implemented. For me, when I look at specifically when Canadian commitments, and when we talk about the expansion of the enhanced forward presence from a battalion group to a brigade level group, and the roadmap that was announced, we're yet to see the implementation of how those would go. But it is important, I think, to get it out there that now at least we know we have certain numbers attached to it, right? We know a certain budget amount attached to it. We, 2.6 billion over 3 years. Some of it is old money that is repurposed. Some of it will be new money. I don't know which one's which and where it would go. So we'll still need to see the details. But at least there is a commitment that would hopefully will match the exceptional commitment that Latvia is doing with these 2 big, bases, largest bases in the Baltic region. And hopefully the financial commitments that will support the battle group here would be matching those commitments that Latvia is doing. The second, of course, is the troop commitments that over 3 years Canada aimed to get up to 2,200 troops, which is basically doubling the number of Canadian troops here. Again, I think the devil is in the details. How fast that will happen. I think 3 years is a bit too long.
Do you think Canadians can do it faster?
I think we could do faster, and we should try to do faster. Now, there are challenges in terms of recruitment within the Canadian Armed Forces. Those are real problems, real challenges. There's a reason why, for example, Canada did not take part in Air Defender 23. Among the allies that have a substantial air force, Canada and Portugal are the ones that actually didn't show up. And the primary reason is personnel. Limited number of pilots. I don't exactly remember, but we're talking about 45 to 50 pilots we have. So it's capabilities. That's why we are not going back to air policing in Europe again. I mean, in Romania, Canada has been 6-7 times the lead nation, takes the commanding component. In the foreseeable future, we are not returning. So there are recruitment issues, but that should not be an excuse for not fulfilling the commitments to our NATO allies when we make them, right? So when we make those commitments and when we take those responsibilities, we need to follow through. 3 years, I would say, is a long time. We need to be able to do it faster, and if we are willing to do it faster and provide the necessary troops, we could also incentivize other allies to join. Denmark already announced with 800, 900 troops. If we can speed it up, it could be done. The key to me is that when we look at the EFP, not only the sort of the 4 missions, but the 4 new ones that are being sort of announced, Romania and so on and so forth. It is important that there should not be a gap among the groups, right? You do not want one of the missions to be weaker than the other one. The strength is in the chain, and we need to be able to match Germany and Britain and the United States and others in fulfilling those commitments, and that can be done.
Or they should match your commitments
Yes.
and our commitments.
Yes, exactly. Right. So the host nations should match, the forward-leaning posture of Latvia, providing the necessary infrastructure for it, and the framework nations should actually match each other's commitments, and not only as a PR exercise, but actual deliverable of commitments as well.
Sandis, do you have any additional comments on that, our bilateral part, Latvia-Canada, as far as post-Vilnius summit consequences and our readiness to be presented at our borders with stronger force?
I think this result, has been this result of having Canada here and also enhanced forward presence is very beneficial for Latvia, especially in these security conditions, and those are the fruits of the work. When you were the minister, it's like, and also the predecessors, and I think in terms of the security, in terms of the cooperation among the allies, I think we are on track. Relating to capabilities and the size of the military and the planning and implementation, financing and everything, I think we, the Baltic states, Canada, the United States, Greece, some others, it's like we have been good members of the Transatlantic Alliance. We have always stuck to the 2% spending rule, and I think those are the Germans and French who should learn. France, in terms of political commitments, it's second biggest NATO army in Europe, but especially Germany. And I recall 2 years ago, former German defense minister Anna Karrenbauer, she said that Germany will brace to reach that 2% spending in 15 years. And that was exactly 15 years since Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania joined NATO in 2004, and I thought, how appalling is that? You know, don't you see what's happening on the eastern border? And I think it very much showed Germany's commitment to the European security affairs, because it has always been, you know, we contribute so much, but not 2%, and it's always a slap in the face for Americans. They have not only spent 2% of defense, but also on the research space and everything, you know, and this is what makes the United States not a regional power, but really the international contributor to the international defense, security, rule of law, and all the norms there.
At least they committed to it.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Microphone.
In the sense that Canada is 1.29%. And
that's a bit to work on.
Yes, a lot to work on, and you know, I think it's quite clear the message coming from the allies in the NATO summit as well, that Canada can no longer be a laggard.
But listen, but I have a question then. Actually, okay, Canada is spending on defense at this moment 1.3%, but maybe number of Canadian citizens would say, look, you know, we have only United States bordering us. In more or less, and why should we spend so much? You know, it's not our problem, and why are we actually sending our troops to Latvia? You know, how would you convince Canadian citizens that they should spend more for our common security and their own security?
The public actually have a strong support for increasing defense spending. We did at MLI a number of public opinion surveys. Others like Nick Nanos and a major public opinion survey firm in Canada did it. Significant majorities, 60-65% of Canadians are in full support of increasing defense spending.
That's a large number.
It is a large number, and I think Canadians are understanding that the world changed, that we can no longer be complacent.
So who do not understand?
It's
Sorry,
it's the politicians, I think, who are unwilling to take the lead, and they can no longer hide behind public doesn't want this. No, public is willing to make those commitments, but it's the political leaders that should take the lead and say that, okay, the public understands this. We also have commitments to our allies. This is our security and prosperity that is at stake. So we will make these commitments today, because if we don't pay pennies today, we will pay hundreds of dollars in the future.
But actually, Balkan, I would like to go for a few sentences at least in the depths of this building of international Salia Brigade, as we call it, in the name of the new largest polygon in the Baltics in Latvia. And I think there is a really, as you slightly touched upon, also possibility to get assistance as far as the troops, and assistance also as far as the equipment from other allied nations. Because first, I would like to remind that we have already contribution from Danish battalion, but they are rotating to Latvia only for half a year. And I believe that now, after Finland and Sweden joined NATO, I believe that, for instance, it would be great Nordic, Baltic and also Canadian cooperation if the second half a year within this brigade, for instance, when Danes leave for their homes, could be, let's say, filled in by Swedish group, Swedish battalion. It's simply a question of how we diplomatically approach, and I think here Latvian ministries, respective ministries, and Canadian leadership could approach also Sweden. I actually a little bit did this already in my previous times, and I think also that request for Finland to contribute, for instance, artillery for the Salia Brigade would be a nice request, because Finnish army is relatively large and good army with a lot of artillery, and this training facilities in future might be very good also for them here in Latvia, and we are not so far. So actually a part of Canadians doubling their soldiers in brigade and bringing, for instance, 15 Leopard tanks also in autumn, this autumn actually to Riga, if they would be assisted by Sweden and Finland, plus maybe some of already existing EFP group nations like Italians or Spanish could also think what they else could do. I think we could bring this brigade strength within next, let's say, 2 years up to some maybe 80%, which already would be, I would say that the best contribution is in the Baltic countries.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think having a bit more of a creative diplomacy, a military diplomacy in this sense, to reach out to allies, but also as a framework nation, Canada should lead by an example, right? So making the case that we will move faster, we will commit these resources. If you also lend a hand, we can get this to a meaningful level in a short period of time. And I think one way to do also that is, instead of the persistence, presence language, I think Canada should make the troop deployments permanent.
That's actually very important.
A 3-year or whatever it is, regular permanent deployments, which will enable the soldiers also to bring their families, to be able to set up a routine rather than rotated every 6 months, which makes it a lot harder.
Thank you. Sandis, I think we move to the second question because time is running. And second question of Vilnius Summit, Ukraine. My first take would be that actually partly by some experts, partly by media, partly by some politicians, the expectations from this summit about Ukrainian membership was overestimated. There's a much larger expectations than reality. NATO is not working like this. What do you think about the results for Ukraine in Vilnius Summit?
Yeah, I think it's like what we expected from NATO summit in Vilnius diverges in the Baltic region, in Poland, Central Eastern Europe, in Germany, France, in southern part of Europe, in the United States and Canada. And I was really happy to hear that it should be easy job for the politicians to embrace the popular willingness to beef up the spending. In most of the countries, it's the opposite. It means that you have done a great job. Academia, think tanks, and media are working well in Canada, and therefore citizens understand the security challenges that Canada, as a NATO ally, is facing. That they are important, and if you will not deal with Russia here, they will come to Arctic. There may be challenges in Pacific internationally. We will have to deal with those, and we have to make sure we have sufficient resources. And currently, I'm conducting research on the sufficient necessary size of an army for most of the NATO member states. The focus will be on the Baltic states, but I think this statistical and also qualitative model can be applied to Canada, maybe similar as Norway, Europe and North America, but we'll see what will the results be, and I think it will also be a very good ground for discussion. With the summit, yes, one of the results that is very important for the European security is Ukraine, and also all this rhetoric before the summit that Ukraine should be turned into Israel. There were promises from the United States that Ukraine might receive security equipment and guarantees similar to Israel, so they can defend and win the war against Russia. The question is, like in western part of Europe, can Russia lose? Will Germans and French accept losing Russia?
So you mean that not all nations still want to see Ukraine to win, which actually in Madrid summit, I remember myself, they had number of politicians, leaders who could not pronounce actually the word Ukraine must win.
Absolutely.
Did it change or not?
I mean, we always debate here that Ukraine must win this war, that Ukraine, considering the resilience and popular commitment, it will win the war. The question is, like, if Western Europe, Germany, France, and others who were always saying we shouldn't humiliate Putin, we should not humiliate Russians or Russia, their ostensible greatness and imperial ambitions stemming from historical delusions. I think this is exactly what we have to do to turn Russia into a normal country. And if we don't get past this benchmark or delusion that still also dwells somewhere in Europe, I think it will be painful, and we will have to deal with those lessons again. With Ukraine, of course, Central Eastern Europe, Baltic states, those who support Ukraine mostly expected some concrete actions that Ukraine would receive during the NATO summit with the Thailand's detailed criteria. Not easy for the transformation of Ukraine into Western country by receiving NATO invitation and probably also joining the European
But Sandis,
Union.
if I may interrupt you, we know how accession works once we speak about European Union. There are Copenhagen criteria, nitty-gritty, cucumber sizes, whatever, if I'm a little bit kind of joking. But as far as NATO, I still think that this is at the end a political decision. So my take would be from Vilnius summit that this language what foreign departments actually were constructing is that they created a situation where if they want, they can delay this political decision about Ukrainian membership. But if they want, they of course could come together and say, okay, now we simply accept this. And one more thing, what maybe Balkan also could say a few words about is that sometimes people, experts and journalists, maybe they do not draw enough of a difference between membership of NATO for Ukraine and invitation to join NATO, which is totally different thing as far as, let's say, our assistance, if I may say so, to Russia to transit from empire to normal state. So how would you both comment on that?
I just want to conclude quickly. You mentioned that Vilnius summit was a continuation of Madrid. I think also the Vilnius summit, in terms of political decisions relating to Ukraine specifically, was the continuation of Bucharest summit, because no decision is also a decision, and Ukraine is in the same place.
So you think it's a no decision?
It's a no decision. I think also the term for the present Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg, was extended so he can deliver the bad news and then resign. Yeah. If there was a new Secretary General and said, you have to wait, strong language in our memoirs and tweets, it doesn't help Ukrainian military society and the families and civilians to overcome this war, but because the Western countries in their articles have been calling this crisis, it's a war, and now Ukraine is defending European security, and I think this summit is very bad for the European security. It's good for the Baltic states because of Swedish membership pending the vote in Turkish parliament, but it's bad decision for the European security. For our region, the Baltic states, I think it's good, and we already spoke about the contributions: Finns, Swedes, Danes, Norwegians. Iceland doesn't have an army, and the video operator from Germany came to Latvia. But they should practically come to support the establishment of our military base area, enhance the forward presence to the battalion size even more, because Russia, in terms of manpower, has been always superior, and their military bases are within 100 kilometers from Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Finland, and this is the front line.
Balkan, your take about Ukraine.
I think there are a couple of things. I mostly agree with what you just said, but particularly that this is a political decision, and it is about the unwillingness on the part of Washington, as well as Germany, but others also sort of take that opportunity to hide behind Germany and the United States.
So Germany took a blow in Europe.
Yes.
For that.
French, for example, Macron in the past couple of months shifted completely different. They are giving long-range missiles, much more forward-leaning, from what I understand.
But actually, when will they deliver those missiles?
Yes, well, I don't know. So, we need to see the delivery.
Because frequently promises are coming, and then the question is it in a next day, in a month, or in half a year?
Exactly,
so,
right. So
not always we follow up that.
Exactly. So I think the key there is to understand that, and this is a line I keep saying whenever I had a chance, is that supporting Ukraine is not charity. It is self-interest.
Right.
They are fighting not only for themselves, but they are protecting the Transatlantic Alliance over there. They're willing to die to do that. And the least we could do is to give them whatever they need to finish
in the
job.
right time.
In the right time, right? I think, going back, Ukraine needs to win and Russia needs to lose, right? And what people think about when they come up with, Russia already strategically lose. That's weak language. That's basically going back to the argument of, the sphere of influence, etc., etc. They are no longer a bigger threat to us. Who cares about what's happening in the Central Eastern Europe, in the Baltics. That is, I think, the wrong framing we need to be paying attention to.
So, if I may kind of a little bit round up both of experts regarding Vilnius summit and Ukraine, maybe I would say that Ukraine did not come out as a winner from the summit, at least not as a clear winner, but since it's not just a Ukrainian cause, it's a NATO cause, it is a cause of all the civilized democracies, then actually we also altogether did not come out from the summit as winners. And then the question would be, well, who came out as a winner from Vilnius summit? And my assumption would be that actually the winner from Vilnius summit was Turkey and Turkish President Erdogan. Would you agree with this? Because Erdogan came, he gave a green light finally for Swedish membership. He got, I think, quite a bit in return as far as the support from Swedish side. And here I actually agree with such politicians and thinkers as Carl Bildt for Turkish negotiations as far as EU. Also, as understand, they got some kind of understanding regarding lifting those sanctions of trade and military cooperation which were put on Turkey 2018. I think that Turkey also showed itself as at least as an independent regional player, which on the one hand can look into the eyes of Putin and Russians and do independently the things, but at the same time still stressing that Turkey is alliance and allied country of NATO. So in short, would you agree that if not Ukraine, then at least Ankara is a winner in the summit?
Ankara, I think, did win significantly, especially in the short to medium term. In the long term, I would think that this might actually work in a contrary, because it also makes it much more clear that Erdogan sees the relationship in a very transactional terms, right? And that the whole drama about the Swedish membership, despite the fact that there are very real legitimate grievances on the part of Turkey to deal with the presence of PKK and others in Sweden, the instrumentalization of the NATO membership, I think, left a very bitter taste in the mouths of allies, and the relationship is very transactional. Now, Erdogan is very good at walking a tightrope, right? And he has been doing that with NATO allies and Russia for a long while. The trick is, of course, that you sometimes have to get down from the high wire. Eventually, you need to. Whether you're gonna get down, safely, or you will fall down.
And the luck can actually change.
Run out, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but he has been playing that role very successfully, to be frank, and again positioned Turkey and himself as sort of an indispensable part of any security arrangement in the region, from the Black Sea to the Balkans to the Mediterranean and beyond. But I think, like I said, in the long term, this might actually end up backfiring, because the relationship became much more transactional.
Sandis, Turkey, Vilnius, and Sweden.
I 100% agree with Balkan, and one of my academic supervisors in the United States said that in medieval times, when a diplomat came back from the mission and said, I scored all the gains and there are no concessions, we are 100% winners, you have to kill such a diplomat. In contemporary world, you just fire them, because the diplomacy and foreign affairs is the art of compromises, right? And as you said, in the short term, politically, of course, Erdogan is a winner. He has gotten most of the Vilnius NATO summit, and has received most of the things he requested from Swedes, clamping down on the opposition groups in Sweden, getting F-16s from the United States, and other things, for the vote of the parliament that doesn't cost much, and also receiving Swedish support with the revising of the Turkish membership in the EU. I think it's very important, because the Swedes then would be parenting Turkey and also contributing to the Turkish-Greek rapprochement. I think it's very important, and then eventually it's a win for NATO and Europe if we see Turkey eventually joining EU, and then this European fatigue at some point might disappear. In the long-term perspective, of course, Turkey will have to give something for it, something for it has received now, and I think it is a legitimate conclusion by you. About the winners, I think, and I have to quote Richard Holbrooke, who said in 1994, 1995 that NATO is basically about NATO standing behind every single NATO member state when it is under the attack. And then the rest of the NATO member states simply have to follow the US leadership. So if the United States can deliver same security guarantees in a short term to Ukraine as it is giving to Israel, I think it equals in terms of practical contribution, military contribution, and we have to look at the situation in a realist perspective. It equals the membership, right?
I mean, maybe two quick points. One on the EU Swedish support. I think that's much more of a PR line for Erdogan at home. Nobody's expecting anytime soon, EU membership for Turkey.
And Sweden is only one country in the EU.
Exactly, and they will say yes we support, but there will be others to stop that anyway. So I don't necessarily see anything major coming out of that. And Turkey is, I'll be happy to buy everyone here a dinner if Turkey ever became a EU member. I don't think it's going to happen. But it provides a line for Erdogan at home to be able to say that, look, not only we are getting what we want from the Americans, lifting the embargo on F-16s, but we are also getting things from the Swedes. Not only this, but see, they listen to us. It's a very PR move. So it's very superficial.
Which should be understood actually in Turkey by public.
Yeah, exactly. So he should do that. On the NATO Israel component, I think the trouble with that is that it will take a lot more legislative effort to be able to put structures in the United States as well as in all these different kind of political systems across different NATO member states that would actually put those support in a structured 5-10 year ways with specific commitments rather than actually going and taking the political decision. And of course, the strategic situation is different because Israel also have nuclear weapons, and that actually also balances out, right? Israel has nuclear weapons, Ukraine doesn't, so the balance out there is completely different, I would say. But it is important that those countries that are willing to engage in a multilateral security commitments to Ukraine, we should actually, the Central Eastern European countries, Baltics, I would say Canada should actually step up in that level.
But actually, what do you think? How serious are these guarantees, kind of guarantees, which were pronounced like from G7? I mean, this is not a military alliance. How do you translate that language into something practical? Anybody can shortly maybe comment on that?
I mean, the devil is in the details, right? Words are cheap, actions are costly. We know what words, commitments, assurances mean with Budapest in 1994, right?
We see it.
Yeah, right, we saw what happened. So that's, unless there is a written piece of agreement. I mean, going back to our initial comment, one of the reasons I think the decisions that were taken in Madrid also forced the hand of other allies to actually come up with the words is that they were written and signed.
You mean Latvian Canadian document?
Exactly, right. So in a similar way, what you need is not just some vague assurances and commitments, but very specific set of capabilities. This is X amount of, we gotta provide these weapon systems. We gotta, under these circumstances, we will provide troops, etc., etc. You need to have those very clearly written and agreed upon, and then make it binding, rather than yes, we have your back. Well, that's not gonna fly.
I have one more issue regarding Vilnius summit, which I think was underreported, because most of the Vilnius summit, you probably will agree, went on in the lights of Ukraine. And for us, of course, here about the Baltics. But underreported part is that actually in Vilnius summit, participated 4 Pacific nations: Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. In my view, that actually, in this all larger context, means that NATO is expanding its relationship with these Pacific nations, and I would not exclude that in future, if these nations would be somehow threatened in the Pacific, NATO would have to actually and will go into assistance as far as security necessities of these 4 nations. That would be my translation, and I know that such countries as People's Republic of China, of course, is very worried about such type of cooperation. What would be, Sandis, maybe your comment on this part of Vilnius summit, which I think was underrepresented, and Balkan, what would be your comment? As a Canada is also a Pacific nation.
Yes. Absolutely, I think the interest for the United States in terms of NATO, and that's the major leading power, has always been to contain China, to avoid any China-Taiwan military incident escalating into a war. And then the United States, also Canada and other Pacific nations would have to shift their resources to make sure this conflict is averted. This model, Russia-Ukraine conflict, converges with the security situation in the Pacific, and the Taiwanese have been closely watching what is going on here. So are Chinese. Therefore, the Taiwanese reluctance to send any military aid apart from hospitals, civilian support, has been limited to very low civilian casualties, no military aid. And I think also this is the instance that has averted China and the communist China to support Russia overtly in terms of military supplies. I think this international cooperation for NATO is long overdue. NATO has always been presented as a regional power, but we have always coped with international challenges, the Middle East, terrorism, and everything. And I think you cannot draw the strict lines along the World War I analogy when the equipment of the soldier was rifle, spade, and a coat. The conflict is very more sophisticated. It stems from different kind of domains, digital communication and everything. And military leaders and students at different institutions, they speak about integration, about all domains. We really don't know what it is. Therefore, I think it's this participation, especially from the countries with the cutting-edge technologies, South Korea, Japan, Australia. I think it is very important to boost the NATO capability and enhance the regional deterrence of any threat, and also international commitment to the norms and rules, because if we fail in Pacific, how can we sustain these norms within the Western Alliance? I think it's really important.
Balkan.
No, I mean, I completely agree. I think there are 2 things that we need to sort of keep in mind. That the Euro-Atlantic and the Indo-Pacific theaters, in terms of security and economy, are very much interconnected. We cannot treat them as completely isolated things. What happens over there is not our problem. What happens over here is not their problem. No. And I think our Indo-Pacific allies, Japan and South Korea and Australia and New Zealand, understand this. And that's why they were, particularly in the case of Japan, quite unprecedentedly joined the sanctions against Russia, which they have a very complicated relationship because of the territorial disputes as well, and their neighbors, and there's a history out there. Started to send military aid. The Japanese have been providing, for example, in Ukraine, anti-drone warfare equipment and other things, and they're very vocal about their support for Ukraine, and they make the linkage very clear. This is a matter of the principles of international law, international order. If we don't stand for them now, how can we ask others to stand for us later on? And the same story goes for the Taiwanese and the South Koreans as well. So they are making it clear by coming in the Madrid first and then now, making it clear that they take the Euro-Atlantic security as a serious issue for them. And we will not have the option to sit on the sidelines if there is a military contingency in the Taiwan Straits or in South China Sea. And Canada, I mean, people think Canada is like, oh, up there, very safe and so on and so forth. But Canada is in the middle of three contested areas: the Arctic, the Indo-Pacific,
Right.
and the Atlantic. Yes, we do have United States as the big brother down there, but we are as much of a Pacific nation as we are.
So
Atlantic
actually, as far as Canadian-Latvian relationship, we can say that we have actually a common border country with Canada, which is Russia.
Exactly.
In Arctic, it is for Canadians.
Exactly.
Here on the
Exactly.
land, it is for us. But I very much would like to compliment, at least lately, all what such countries as Japan, for instance, was doing, because also the increase of military budget, support for Ukraine, joining sanctions, and we must remember that, in fact, country which is now waging the war against Ukraine, Russia, actually in international law, they occupy Japanese northern territories, a number of islands. So I think it is very sensible what Japan actually is lately doing. Now, I think our time is running up, and just a very last comment, not about past, not about Vilnius or Madrid, but about future. And here I would like to refer to what Sandis told, in fact, that the message about Ukraine was not a good message what was delivered by Secretary General. We know that next year there is a 75 years anniversary of NATO as a transatlantic alliance. Summit will happen in Washington. Possibly there will be again a new Secretary General. Can we expect that the new Secretary General is coming with better news for anybody here? Anything in a very short comment from Sandis or from Balkan regarding future?
Thank you very much. We have to be very realist about our security affairs. And Russia is shuffling its nuclear arsenal. It's a PR trick. Are the nukes in Belarus? We don't know, probably. Ukraine was a nuclear power. It gave it away in 1994, but Belarus got it back now. Yeah, the question is, like, should we give a nuke to Ukrainians? I think they would be reluctant to accept. But if there is a conflict in the Pacific and the United States must shift its military resources there, it is necessary also for the Europeans to reconsider giving nuclear weapon to Poles, for example. That is the cornerstone for the Central Eastern European security. They are stable, they are democracy, they are European nation, they are significant contributor not only to regional but international security affairs. That's one thing to consider.
Sandis, but one more thing regarding Central and Eastern Europe. Here I would like to refer to such an expert also as Andrew Michte, a good friend of all of us probably, because he told lately in one of his comments that actually Western European nations finally should reconsider their attitude towards Central and Eastern Europe in general, because frequently this attitude is not like, at least after a few beers, it's not always based on this internal equality and understanding stances as we would expect. So I would also here mention this as a conceptual philosophical approach, how Western Europeans are actually looking upon Eastern and Central Europeans, and maybe also vice versa.
Absolutely.
But Washington.
Just to conclude, I read Deans of the Marshall Center's articles. Andrew Michte is contributing to 1949 and Chinese and European security affairs. I think if we will tweet our willingness, our philosophy, and will not get into action, we will be forced to pay more and give more for the inaction at the moment. And I think we have to look at the details. The message for Ukraine was bad. I very much hope the details will be very beneficial for the Ukrainian victory. There's no compromise to Russia losing, because if we leave such revisionists on the border of Europe, then the question is who is going to be next.
And
Arctic, Canada, Baltic states, Finland, in many philosophy books of the Russian writers, is regarded as Russian geostrategically. So we have to look there, and I will conclude on that. Like, the details are important. The summit is over. We have to look how the major powers bilaterally, the United States, Israel commitment, IPAC and everything, on the same lines, how they can build this relation with Ukraine to stand behind the promises, and let's see how it works out. I very much hope positively. So the war is over, Russia loses, and then Ukraine can start the transformation to become more Western country and join NATO eventually, which is a political decision, because in terms of norms and regulations, NATO is very shallow.
And in a long term, I would like to repeat once more what I told, that in a long term, loss for Russia is beneficial for Russia itself,
Yes.
because people and countries are learning not from victories but from losses. So it's time finally to also for Russian society and politicians to get on another stage of civilization.
Yeah, I mean, on that note, let me start with that, and then very brief comment on Washington and what we can expect on that component. I think the fundamental change would come to Russia when Russians understand that they are no longer an empire but a normal state, that they have no right to dictate the lives and the choices of other peoples around themselves. And that only would come with a significant defeat, a humiliating defeat, that would force the changing mentality within the Russian ruling elite and the Russian public at large. The trouble with the collapse of the Soviet Union was that we never had a de-Czechistification, right? We never had a process in which the security forces, the Slovaki, so on and so forth, were removed from power and paid the price for the crimes. They were weakened, but they were left resentful. Right? So there was no real reckoning. And whenever they had the opportunity, with Putin coming to power, they seized that and engaged in revanchism. We should not repeat this mistake again. We should definitely engage with that. On Washington, I think it will depend a lot on how the war would go towards for the rest of this year. And we should do two things. I think it's important to remember that this is going to be a legacy issue for Biden. So I think he would like to also have some major developments up there. But the second thing is that we should not stop pushing for a much more clear vision and an invitation for Ukraine to NATO, and should not let the disappointing results of Vilnius summit to let us slow down our efforts to talk to our friends and colleagues in those capitals that are skeptical about this and have misconceptions about what the invitation to membership means versus membership, and
Precisely.
continue to push for and make the case that having Ukraine in NATO after the war will make Europe much more secure. The lesson of Bucharest is not that we should have never offered the membership vision. The lesson of Bucharest was that we did not give a clear membership pathway, and the gray zone is where Russia thrives. We should not let Ukraine become a gray zone.
So I would like to conclude that now we have 1 year for allied countries, for Ukraine and for whole world to work on maybe three issues. First, to get to the point where in Washington we actually can agree about invitation to Ukraine. And as far as this war and the outcome of the war, I would probably clarify here two, in my view, important goals. One goal is to make Russia incapable to invade neighboring countries again until the mindset from empire is not changed to the normal mindset. And the second goal, in my view, would be to work on a long-term strategy to make Russian society and Russian elites to understand actually that it's not good, that they are unwilling to wage wars against neighbors. I would like to thank, ladies and gentlemen, all the audience who are still following us and followed us. I would like to say thank you for this great cooperation between three institutes, which is the Northern Europe Policy Center, first of all represented by me. This is by Sandis Šrāders, which is our external expert and also member of Center for Security and Strategic Studies in National Academy of Defense. And of course, Balkan Devlen, who came here not only from Vilnius but also from Canada, and who is the director of Transatlantic program of Macdonald-Laurier Institute, our partner and friend. Thank you, everybody, and looking forward for the next discussion online. Follow us.